On the 15th of June 1990, Rosie Alfaro went to a friend's house in Anaheim, California, as she desperately needed some money and planned to break in and steal some valuables. When she got to the house, she knocked on the front door, and her friend's 9-year-old little sister Autumn answered. Little Autumn Wallace recognized her older sister's friend Rosie and let her inside. Rosie told Autumn that she needed to use the bathroom, so Autumn returns to what she was doing, coloring paper dolls with crayons, and Rosie entered the house. As Rosie entered, she took a knife from the kitchen and went towards the bathroom. Rosie knew she couldn't leave any witnesses to the theft, so she called little Autumn Wallace over to help her with something in the bathroom. Trusting and helpful Autumn got up from her coloring and headed over to help her sister's friend. Rosie's actions in the bathroom that day led her to become the first woman in Orange County to get the death penalty. On Friday, the 15th of June 1990, 9-year-old Autumn Wallace came home early from her school, as school had finished early that day at around 2:35 p.m. Autumn arrived home at her family house in Headland Drive in Anaheim, California, and she started coloring as she waited for her mother, Linda Wallace, and her older sister, April Wallace, to return home from work. Autumn then heard a knock at the door and opened it up to see her older sister's friend, Maria del Rosio Alfaro, standing there. Maria del Rosio, better known as Rosie, was born on October 12, 1971 in California. She grew up in Anaheim and had a tough upbringing. By the time she was 13, she was an addict, and in 7th grade she dropped out of school, and by 14, Rosie started dabbling in sex work. A year later, at 15, she became a single mother to her first child, and by the time she was 18, Rosie was a mother of 2 and pregnant with twins. On the day of the 15th of June, 1990, 19-year-old Rosie Alfaro was high, and she desperately needed money for another fix. Rosie knew the Wallace family very well and was a high school friend of April Wallace, one of the older daughters. In the course of her friendship with April, Rosie visited the Wallace home on many occasions and even resided there for a short time whilst pregnant with her second child, so she knew the house very well. She knew there were valuable items around and that she would be able to steal them and then sell in order to purchase drugs. When sweet 9-year-old Autumn saw her sister's friend Rosie at the door, being the trusting and vulnerable child she was, she immediately let her in, as Rosie said she needed to use the bathroom. When Rosie was inside the house, Rosie took a knife from the kitchen drawer before proceeding to the bathroom, which was located at the back of the house. Rosie then lured Autumn into the bathroom, telling her that she needed help cleaning her eyelash curler. With Autumn in the bathroom, Rosie proceeded to stab the young girl 57 times. Rosie Alfaro then raided the house for things to steal. She ransacked the home and stole items including a portable television, a VCR, a typewriter, a telephone, and a Nintendo set. All these items she managed to sell on later for just $240. April Wallace, Autumn's older sister, then attempted to phone home at approximately 4:30 p.m. to let Autumn know that she would be arriving home late from work, but Autumn did not answer the phone. When April got home 45 minutes later, at about 5:15 p.m, she found the house in a state of disarray. The hall closet was open and things were scattered around. April entered her bedroom and she noticed that her television and mirror were missing and some clothing had been thrown around. April called out for Autumn but received no answer, so she immediately left the house and went across the street to a neighbor's home. Half an hour later, at approximately 5:40 p.m, Linda Wallace arrived home and was told by her older daughter April that the house had been burglarized and that Autumn was missing. Linda entered the house in search of her youngest daughter Autumn and noticed that many items were missing. As she was unable to locate a telephone in the house, Linda told April to call the police from the neighbor's house. As April called the police, Linda searched further into her home, and sadly discovered Autumn's little body in the back bathroom. Autumn was in a pool of blood, stabbed 57 times, and there was an eyelash curler laying at her feet. Orange County Sheriff's Department investigator Tom Griffin arrived at the Wallace residence at approximately 7:20 p.m. later that evening. He immediately started talking to neighbors, asking them if they had seen anything suspicious. Some of the neighbors said that they had seen a reddish or goldish bronze Monte Carlo parked in the driveway of the Wallace residence, and 2 Hispanic men standing nearby, facing the street earlier that afternoon. They said that one of the men was holding a child who was approximately 18 months of age. A few hours later, at approximately 11:15 p.m., Rosie Alfaro and her boyfriend, Manuel Cueva, and their son Manny walked past the Wallace home. Rosie asked Tom Griffin if she could speak with her friend April, but he told her that this was not a good time and declined. As he spoke to Rosie, Manuel and Manny, he remembered neighbors saying that they had spotted a small child in front of the house with 2 Hispanic men, with similar descriptions to that of Manny and Manuel. The following day, a fingerprint was lifted from the Wallace bathroom, and it later came back as that of Rosie Alfaro. With evidence pointing towards Rosie, Tom Griffin immediately brought her in for questioning, but she denied any involvement in Autumn's murder. Following Rosie's questioning, the investigators managed to obtain a bag of clothing that Rosie had left at a friend's house. The bag contained April Wallace's boots, as well as LA Gear tennis shoes, which belonged to Rosie. DNA testing conducted by the Orange County Sheriff's Department Crime Lab revealed that blood found on the bottom of the LA Gear tennis shoes was consistent with Autumn Wallace's blood and not of Rosie's. Several shoe prints were also found on the floor outside the bathroom, which had the same general class characteristics as the marks on the soles of these shoes. Additionally, Rosie's fingerprints and palm prints matched some of the 26 prints discovered at various locations around the house. This was the extra evidence investigators needed, and the police managed to obtain a warrant for Rosie's arrest. Two weeks after Autumn's murder, Rosie Alfaro was interrogated by 2 sheriff investigators during a 4.5-hour-long taped interview. This time, Rosie confessed to the murder and the burglary of the Wallace home. Rosie said that on the day of the murder, she was driven at 11 a.m. to purchase drugs, taking her son Manny with her. Once Rosie had exhausted her supply, she decided to find a way to get some money, as she had none. Rosie, her son, and 2 men drove to the Wallace home, as she had told one of the men that she had left a VCR at the residence from when she had lived there. She handed her son Manny to one of the men and entered the home. Rosie told the police that she decided to kill Autumn because the child could identify her as the perpetrator of the burglary. She explained that she took the knife into the bathroom, and for several minutes she considered killing Autumn. Once her decision was made, she called Autumn into the bathroom, tricking her by asking Autumn to come and help her clean her eyelash curlers. Trusting Autumn had thought nothing malicious of this, as this was her sister's friend that she knew quite well. She stopped her colouring and went into the bathroom to find Rosie. Rosie said that when Autumn turned around to start cleaning the curlers, she immediately started stabbing Autumn in the back, chest and head. Rosie explained that she was wired and high on drugs, and that when she stabbed Autumn, Autumn did not resist or make any sound. It was never proven, however, whether Rosie actually had drugs in her system, since she was arrested much later. During this interview, Rosie repeatedly stated that she acted alone in killing Autumn, and repeatedly denied that either of the men who came with her to the Wallace residence knew of her plans to burglarize the house. Rosie then said she removed the television set from April's room and a VCR from the living room. She carried these items outside to the vehicle, where one of the men, Antonio Reynoso, better known as Shorty, was waiting with her son Manny. She then went back to the house and took a typewriter, mirror, telephone, clock radio, clothing, and a pair of boots from April's bedroom. She also removed a telephone, an iron, lamp, radio, and a Nintendo game from Linda's bedroom, and a clock and a calculator from the living room. She then attempted to take a microwave oven, but later determined that it was too big to fit inside the car. Finally, she took the knife she had used to stab Autumn with, and then left the house. Through the 4.5-hour interrogation, Rosie consistently maintained that Shorty remained outside in the driveway with Manny throughout the whole crime, but she was inconsistent in describing the whereabouts of the second man. She initially said that he exited from the car to help her place the items inside, but did not physically enter the house. Later, however, she suggested that the man may have entered the house and implied that he had gone inside as far back as the rear bedroom. Police also found it strange that Rosie said the car they were driving was an older model, dark blue Camaro, when numerous witnesses had described the car as a goldish brown Monte Carlo. Rosie also failed to identify the second man that was with them. She repeated that she did not know his identity. Despite being given numerous opportunities by the police to implicate another person in Autumn's murder, Rosie repeatedly insisted that she had acted alone. During the trial, however, Rosie's story changed. She alleged that the unidentified man, whom she referred to as Beto, had forced her to stab Autumn. She testified she had used drugs shortly before going to the Wallace home and said that she was out of her head. She said she did not know Autumn would be home and did not plan to harm her. She said that Autumn recognized her before letting her into the house, that she then gave Autumn her eyelash curlers and asked her to clean them. She continued, saying that Beto was also wired on drugs and that upon discovering Autumn in the house, he had become angry, put a knife to Rosie's back, and threatened to kill her baby if she did not stab Autumn. Rosie testified she stabbed Autumn a couple of times initially, but claimed Beto must have inflicted the remainder of the stab wounds found on Autumn's body. She testified that when she came down from her high, she saw Autumn lying there and couldn't believe that she was dead. Despite alleging that this second man was the one who had really killed Autumn, she never identified him, saying that to do so would jeopardize the lives of her family and her 4 young boys, saying, "If I wasn't so scared my family would get hurt, I'd tell the truth, but I just can't." Despite Rosie's new allegations, the evidence from the crime scene only indicated that members of the Wallace family and Rosie were present in the home that day, based on the fingerprints and blood-stained shoe prints found at the scene. Much of the prosecution's case was built around the 4.5-hour videotaped interrogation of Rosie made by the 2 sheriff's investigators, and they were going for the death penalty. During the trial, the district attorney told the jury that Rosie had not accepted responsibility for the murder and that she lacked remorse. Deputy District Attorney Charles J. Middleton showed a series of enlarged pictures starting with a school photo of Autumn Wallace and then leading to photos of the ransacked house and Autumn's body. Apologizing for the display of pictures, Charles Middleton said, "I put the photographs up, but Rosie Alfaro did this. It is not easy for me to stand up here and ask you to recommend a death sentence. Why did someone have to kill that little 9-year-old girl? Where is that maternal instinct that all children are precious? It's not in Rosie Alfaro." Charles Middleton cited that the death penalty was appropriate, citing that the crime was brutal, senseless, and horrific. Rosie's defense lawyer, William M. Monroe, quickly removed the prosecution's pictures, saying, "When I look at these photos, I cry. I have a 6-year-old. I cry when I see this little girl." Monroe then put up pictures of Rosie Alfaro's 4 young children. William Monroe said, "Rosie Alfaro is not a girl who should die. Killing Rosie Alfaro is not going to reverse that tragedy. The death penalty should be reserved for the worst of the worst killers, such as Jeffrey Dahmer, the Hillside Strangler, and the Freeway Killer. When Alfaro went to the Wallace home, nobody was supposed to be home. No one was supposed to get hurt." He then swapped out the photos of Rosie's children with photos from her own childhood, recounting the disintegration of her family and her involvement with drugs and prostitution beginning in her preteen years. Monroe said, "Put yourself in the middle of that barrio environment, the streets." Rosie later read from the witness stand a letter addressed to Autumn. "I have a picture of you in my Bible, and every time I open it, I see your innocent face, and I think of my boys and what I would do if something were ever to happen to them. So please know that I am deeply and truly sorry, Autumn, and I will pay the rest of my life for what happened." Ultimately, the jury at the first penalty phase trial was unable to reach a verdict, and the trial courts declared a mistrial. A second penalty phase trial commenced in mid-May 1992, and in June that same year, the jury found her guilty of the charges, and they determined that Rosie Alfaro should be sentenced to death. Maria del Rosio Alfaro became the first Orange County woman on death row and was sentenced to death in the gas chamber. As the clerk read aloud the jury's recommendation, Linda Wallace, Autumn's mother, wept as their supporters clapped and cheered. Rosie Alfaro's relatives, however, gasped aloud in disbelief. Rosie jerked upright, then covered her face with her hands and sobbed. Linda Wallace had been at court every day since the trial had begun, and she said every moment was worth it because of this verdict. She said, "The death sentence recommendation is what I wanted. Alfaro did a vicious thing and she got what she deserved." Amber, Autumn's sister, said, "It's been 2 years of hell and that's finally over. I'm just relieved with the verdict. Life wasn't good for Alfaro. She brutally murdered my sister and she deserves to die." Rosie appealed her death sentence, in part by claiming that she was denied effective assistance of her lawyer, who unreasonably withheld consent when she wanted to plead guilty to murder and then seek mercy during the penalty phase. But Chief Justice Ron George found that Rosie's defense attorney, William Monroe, acted properly in refusing to go along with the guilty plea strategy, and so her appeal was denied. Following the sentence, Rosie said, "I know it's hard for the Wallaces to forgive me, and I don't ask for their forgiveness. If it had been one of my kids that was killed, I'm a mother too, I'd probably do the same thing, celebrate. I just want them to know that I'm truly sorry for what happened, but I also wish that they would believe me, that there was a third person there. I do think that someone has to pay for what happened to that poor little girl, and that's me, but I can't help thinking how my life stopped, ended at 18, and that I have no future, and all that is because of drugs." In 2007, Linda and Autumn's sister Amber traveled to San Francisco to go to court as attorneys argued whether Rosie Alfaro's death sentence had been fair. In August of that year, the California Supreme Court voted unanimously to uphold Alfaro's death sentence. In 2014, Rosie's death sentence was overturned by U.S. District Judge Cormac Carney, who argued that the long waits inmates face on California's death row constitute cruel and unusual punishment. 3 years later, however, in 2017, the death sentence was reinstated by a federal appeals court. The 3-judge panel determined that Rosie should face capital punishment for what she did on that day. In 2019, Democratic Governor Gavin Newsom declared that should any execution be scheduled while he is in office, he will use his authority to temporarily block it. Newsom made it one of his first priorities to ensure that neither Rosie Alfaro nor any other killer awaiting punishment in California is ever put to death. Newsom's decree means that the justice long ago promised to Autumn Wallace and to so many other victims will go on being denied. Linda Wallace said that while she waits for justice, she does not spend her time or energy fretting about Rosie Alfaro, saying, "I know she is in a bad place. I know she'll never see the light of day. I'm fine with it. Alfaro hasn't had much of a life since she was arrested in 1990. She just exists. It wouldn't be any life I would want." Autumn's sister April, however, gets mad every time she thinks about the woman who killed her younger sister. For her, Alfaro gets one advantage after another: court-appointed lawyers, 2 penalty hearings, numerous appeals, further saying, "We get nothing, and she gets all of these things. It makes me mad. I just want to see her be put to death, and I want to see it faster than it's taking." Years later, after her little girl's death, Linda Wallace said, "You would think after all this time you would get over it, but you don't. The hardest thing for me is to see people now who are Autumn's age, not being able to see her grow up. That's what bothers me the most. She could be married, she could have kids. That's what I think about." Linda further said that she still regularly cries and that the hurt is still there no matter how much time passes. As always, my heart goes out to Autumn's family, and though I know they must miss their little Autumn an incredible amount, I hope that they can feel a sense of peace knowing that Rosie will spend the rest of her life in prison.